So think about the product you're building. You're building some really cool technology that sits on top of people who are using Twitter to promote candy. Well, I don't know how many people are doing that right now. My guess is not too many. But 6 months from now, there might be a lot. If you had launched a tool for Twitter users 2 years ago, you probably wouldn't have had too many people take up your product. Today, if you're in the real-time searching Twitter business, you've probably got a lot of people interested in what you're doing. This is the Osborne first laptop. They tried shipping it in the early 80s. I'd ask you to raise your hand if you've ever owned one, but I can predict the outcome of that. So think a lot about the target market, as we talked about, and then think a lot about, are you at the right time for your product? So one of the things that my company's involved with, we launched something called Trivia on Twitter. We launched it in June when there are 30 million Twitter people out there. You know what, people like trivia games, so we're doing pretty well. If we had launched that 2 years ago, we'd have like 2 players and nobody would really care. So think about whatever it is you're building, what's in your labs. The previous speaker talked about incubating ideas. It's great. Now make sure you're looking at the right inflection point. Get out there ahead of time. You don't want to be late to the game, you want to be early to the game. But if what you're doing assumes that there's 100 million netbooks in homes, don't launch yet. You're not ready. Next year sometime, right? 2 years from now, maybe. So my favorite marketing analogy, now to start getting to more specifics, is to think of the garden. And I actually spend my mornings gardening, so I can talk a lot about gardening, but probably not as relevant for up here. So when you garden, you generally plant a lot of seeds. You don't put in 1 radish seed, you put in like 100. And you're actually supposed to weed them out as they start growing. And if I think about my backyard, I've planted radishes and tomatoes and squash and melons and lemons. And you know what? My squash aren't coming up. And my tomatoes are, but they're kind of small. But I've already had 4 crops of radishes. Well, what do I do? Next year, plant more radishes. Well, maybe not 2 anymore because you can only eat so many radishes. But the point being, I've experimented in the garden. I've planted a whole lot of seeds. I've treated everything the same. I've nurtured, fertilizer, etc. And I'm watching to see what's growing so I can nurture it more. Right? You have to continue to nurture things in your garden. You can't just put the seeds in and walk away and come back 3 weeks and have radishes. And that, by the way, will be the end of my discussion of radishes for the day. So there's a lot of technologies and tools out there that you can use in your marketing. This is, I actually don't know how many of these companies still exist, but it was a really nice picture. The cool thing is that most of these things are free, and if you haven't been aware of the freeness of the internet, you are missing out. But when you think about blogging, Twitter, Facebook, other forms of social media, LinkedIn, Craigslist, whatever it is that's out there, Box.net, YouTube, Vimeo, there are so many things you can participate in that are utterly free. Some of these will be good channels for you, some of them will not. Some of you will attempt to get the word out about your company over Twitter and will fail, but your blog will be hugely successful. That's okay. That goes back to the gardening thinking. Some of those seeds, they're not going to come. They're just not going to grow. That's okay. The strategy is to pick several technologies, several tools, and apply them differently. As an interesting point for a lot of the companies we're working with, we have had no success whatsoever marketing them on Facebook. They've tried fan pages, groups, events, and had little to no success whatsoever. I was on a panel with a guy who runs a company called Cordurounds. They're these hip corduroys that go horizontal instead of vertical. And he says Facebook is his #1 seller of pants. So don't rule out one technology because your friend didn't have success there. One person's success on Twitter is the next 10 people's utter failure there. That's okay. Look at the technology, look at what you're trying to market, and think appropriately. If you are back-end database optimization for real-time search, I don't know how many YouTube videos are really going to get people excited about what you're doing, right? It's not your forum. But maybe you want to be participating in various discussion groups on programming, on PHP, on Oracle, and all the things that would be relevant to your target market. See how all these things come together, so you pick your timing, you pick your product, you pick your target, you have them well defined, and then you look at what are the tools that are right for you. So I will never get up on the stage and say, hey everybody, go start a blog. Because you don't necessarily have to. I know you're reading a lot of that, the top 10 social media marketing tricks this week. They tend to point to the same things over and over again. Use these as guidelines, don't use these as rules. I am willing to wager if I were to list 20 different technologies, I would never get the same set of hands as to whether they are being successful or unsuccessful for your business. Second to that, just because you're having a dry run with something doesn't mean to give up entirely. You might need to change your strategy. So I'll talk about voice in this. I think I talked about, yeah. So think about your voice, right? This was not a gratuitous cheerleader picture. We just like the concept of the megaphones. Think about your voice online. So you have a blog. What could your blog be for your company? It could be the insider's view. Here's what's going behind the scenes. Here's the webcam at our office. That's cool. That might get people interested. It might not interest anybody whatsoever. Depends what kind of company you are, right? A company like Twitter, for example, right now, if they were to start doing here's what's happening every day in the Twitter office, well, I guess they don't have to because people just steal their documents and publish them. But if you think about the analogy, it works out pretty well. If another option is to be a thought leader, right? If you are the best database search optimization technology, blog about database search optimization technology. Explain to decision makers what you're about and why your technology is so great. And you don't have to pat yourself on the back every week. Talk about it from the thought leadership perspective. In 3 years, the market for database technologies will be X, Y, and Z. Here's where things are going, and here's how we play a part in that. You don't have to sell yourself with every message you put out there. If you're being thought leadership, you're predicting the future. And by the way, you're going to be wrong sometimes. That's okay, right? You're trying to say what you think is going to happen. And you know what? Those comments on your blog will give you a pretty good barometer as to how pie in the sky your vision is. If you're saying that 3 years from now, we'll all be moving to netbooks, I guess some people are going to argue with you, right? And then again, you might be dead on right. We'll find out. So ultimately, define those voices and stay consistent, right? It's not good to go all over the map, right? Where your blog one day is thought leadership, the next day is showing the latest deals at Amazon.com. It doesn't make sense. Have a very specific strategy for each tool you're using and let your voice shine through there. So one of the companies I work with is called Bug Labs. They've chosen to use YouTube to make funny videos. The founder by the way, it's this hardcore Linux computer open source hardware platform, and their first video is him sawing wood and scrapping together the first prototype. It's just out there, it's silly, it's funny, that's his personality, and it shines through perfectly. It doesn't really say anything, it's not selling products, it's showing the spirit of the company. And that's, in their case, what was really relevant to do is that when you're trying to sell technology to open source programmers, odds are you need to be authentic, you need to show openness, you need to have a little bit of fun, right? You need to relate at that level. The good thing is the CEO tends to relate pretty well and doesn't need much coaching on that. So when thinking about social media, as I mentioned before, commenting and reading comments is key. Candidly, everything you're doing these days is a two-way street. If you are sending out tweets and not watching for responses, you're not using Twitter. If you are blogging and don't allow commenting, you are not blogging. If you are on Facebook and not reading fan comments, you're not on Facebook. So I like this picture. It's just so ridiculously wrong. Right? It's upside down, one way in both directions, etc. Right? Social media is a two-way street. Frankly, you cannot be in existence today without having a degree of openness and communication with your customers. A great example, a surprising example, is Comcast. I don't know if anybody here, has anyone here ever had a bad experience with a cable company? No? Okay, I wasn't sure for a second. If you blog or tweet about it, you will see a response within 48 hours. It's pretty impressive. If you think about a company that doesn't need to do that, right? They are effectively a monopoly, legally, whatever, but they really are, right? They don't need to care about your voice. They can just roll on over because their odds are pretty good. You ain't ditching them, right? If you want to watch baseball this summer, you're paying for Comcast. So instead, however, they're taking a leadership perspective. They're saying, well, we're going to see what our customers are doing, and in my opinion, it's because there's enough people steering the ship there